medieval executioner was not a monster. He was something worse. He was a necessary tool that everyone pretended not to need. And when his job was finished, the town treated him like the plague, because in the Middle Ages, death wasn't just punishment, it was public entertainment. And the man holding the axe was expected to carry everyone's guilt for them. Not in theory, in real life. Imagine waking up in a small medieval town before sunrise. The streets are wet from last night's rain. The stones smell like rot and smoke. Somewhere in the distance, church bells ring slow and hollow. You can already hear movement near the square, people setting up stalls, dragging wooden beams, preparing ropes. Not for a festival, for an execution. And you, the executioner, are the centerpiece. Not because they respect you, because they want you to absorb the horror they refuse to face. The crowd will cheer when you do your job. Then they'll spit when you walk past them afterward. That is the executioner's life. A man hired to do violence and then punished for it. And here's the brutal truth. Executioners weren't feared because they were violent. They were feared because they were contaminated. Because medieval society believed death had a stain. And if you touched it for a living, it touched you back. The executioner lived inside a strange contradiction. The town needed him. The law depended on him. The church tolerated him. But the people treated him like something unclean, like he wasn't fully human anymore. And that wasn't symbolic, it was practical. Executioners often couldn't live inside the town walls. They were pushed to the outskirts, near the gallows, near the cemetery, near the places decent people didn't want to look at. Their homes were usually isolated, not because they wanted privacy, because no one wanted them nearby. Children were warned about them. Merchants refused to serve them. Families didn't want their daughters anywhere near them. Because the executioner didn't just kill criminals, he killed the illusion that society was clean. And medieval towns depended on that illusion to survive. People liked to believe justice was pure, that punishment was righteous, that God approved. But the moment the axe fell, the illusion became flesh. The executioner made justice real. And real justice is ugly. It screams, it leaks, it twitches, and sometimes it doesn't die fast. That was another part of the executioner's curse. If you were a good executioner, you had to be precise. You had to be calm. You had to swing with enough force to end it quickly. But if you failed, if you missed, if the blade hit wrong, then the crowd didn't just blame you for incompetence. They blamed you for cruelty. And cruelty was dangerous in medieval superstition, because people believed a botched execution wasn't an accident. It was a sign, a warning from God, or worse, a sign that the executioner enjoyed it. Imagine standing in front of a crowd of hundreds. The prisoner is kneeling, hands bound behind his back. His neck is exposed. The priest is whispering last rites. The air is cold enough to sting, and behind you the crowd is restless. You can hear them shifting, murmuring, laughing. Some are excited, some are afraid, some are there with their children like it's a lesson. You grip the axe, and you know one thing with perfect clarity. If you do your job perfectly, they will hate you. If you do your job poorly, they will hate you more. There is no outcome where you walk away clean. Execution wasn't always beheading. That was the clean method, the prestigious one, usually reserved for nobility. Most people died in uglier ways. Hanging, breaking on the wheel, burning, boiling, quartering, drowning. And the executioner wasn't just swinging an axe. He was operating a system of suffering. Sometimes the condemned didn't die quickly. Sometimes the executioner had to improvise. Sometimes he had to finish the job with a knife. Sometimes he had to pull limbs apart while the victim screamed. This wasn't a one-swing moment. It was a process, a ritual. And the crowd wanted to watch every second. Because medieval justice was designed to terrify the living, not just punish the guilty. That was the real purpose. Public execution was psychological warfare. The state was sending a message. This is what happens when you disobey. And the executioner was the messenger, a man forced to deliver fear for a paycheck. Now here's where it gets darker. Executioners didn't just kill, they also tortured. Because torture wasn't treated as sadism, it was treated as investigation. If a person was accused of a crime, especially heresy, witchcraft, treason, the courts often demanded a confession. And if the accused didn't confess, then the executioner was called. He wasn't called torturer. He was called a technician, a professional, a man who understood the human body the way a butcher understands meat. He knew how far joints could bend, how long someone could survive hanging by the wrists, how to cause pain without causing death too early. And medieval authorities didn't consider that evil. They considered it necessary. But the public still saw the truth. The executioner was the man who touched pain, and pain left a smell. It stuck to him, and it followed him everywhere. In many towns, executioners weren't allowed to join guilds. They couldn't become respected craftsmen. They couldn't vote in civic matters. They couldn't sit in taverns like normal men. They couldn't attend celebrations without being stared at like an infection. They were legally employed, but socially erased, and this is one of the most disturbing parts. Executioners often married only within executioner families, not because they wanted to, because no one else would marry them. Their children inherited the stigma. A son born into that house didn't choose the axe chose him, because society didn't allow escape. If your father was an executioner, you were marked. You were executioner blood. And medieval people believed blood carried destiny, so you didn't get to become a farmer, or a soldier, or a baker. You became what your family already was, a man trained to kill for the law and punished for obeying it. Now imagine what that does to a person's mind. You are surrounded by death, but you are never allowed to grieve. You are surrounded by crowds, but you are never allowed to belong. You are necessary, but you are unwanted. You are paid by the city, but you are treated like a criminal. And the worst part is this: the executioner was expected to be calm, to be silent, to be professional. Because if he showed emotion, people assumed it meant something bad. If he was too cold, they said he was inhuman. If he was too kind, they said he was mocking the condemned. If he prayed, they said it was performative. If he didn't pray, they said he was damned. He couldn't win. His entire existence was built on public disgust. Even his tools carried fear. Executioners often lived with their equipment, ropes, blades, hooks. Because they couldn't store them publicly, they had to maintain them, sharpen them, clean them, sometimes clean them of blood. And medieval blood wasn't just a stain. Blood was a symbol. Blood meant sin. Blood meant spiritual contamination. So when the executioner walked through town, people didn't just see a man. They saw the invisible reminder of spilled blood. And that reminder felt like a curse. But the irony is this: executioners weren't always poor. In many places, they were paid well. Because no one wanted the job. They were sometimes given free housing, tax exemptions, extra privileges. Sometimes they even collected the condemned person's clothing as payment. And yet none of it mattered, because money doesn't buy belonging. You can't spend coins to make people stop looking at you like death. And sometimes executioners had to make extra income in strange ways. They would sell animal carcasses, handle dead bodies, work as knackers, people who disposed of diseased livestock. Because once society decides you're unclean, it pushes you into every dirty job available. Death work becomes your entire identity. Even stranger, Executioners sometimes became unofficial healers because they understood anatomy better than most physicians. They knew where bones broke, where arteries ran, how bodies failed. So some executioners sold medical services on the side, pulling teeth, setting fractures, selling remedies made from human fat, blood, or bone. And yes, this happened because medieval medicine was desperate, superstitious, and brutal. People feared the executioner, but also believed he carried forbidden knowledge, like he had touched death and stolen secrets from it. So the same people who wouldn't sit near him in church might secretly knock on his door at night, begging for help, begging for medicine, begging for something they were ashamed to ask from anyone else. The executioner became a shadow doctor, a man people avoided publicly and used privately, which is the perfect summary of medieval hypocrisy. And then there's the executions themselves. Some days, the executioner wasn't killing murderers. He was killing thieves, starving men, women accused of adultery, teenagers accused of blasphemy. Sometimes he executed people who were innocent, or people who were guilty only because they were convenient scapegoats. And he knew it. He had to know it. Because you can't look into someone's eyes before you kill them and not feel something. But he wasn't allowed to protest. If an executioner refused an order, he could be punished. He could be replaced. Or he could become the next body on the platform. Because medieval justice didn't tolerate hesitation. The law didn't want morality, it wanted obedience. So the executioner learned to survive by separating himself from the act, by becoming mechanical, by becoming a tool. And once you become a tool, people stop treating you like a man. Now imagine the aftermath. The body hangs from the gallows. The crowd disperses. They go back to their bread, their gossip, their prayers. And the executioner is left behind, not with applause, not with honor, with cleanup, because someone has to remove the corpse. Someone has to dispose of the remains. Someone has to scrub the wood. Someone has to wash the blood from the stones, and that someone is always the same man. He walks home alone, past windows that close when he approaches, past children who stare at him like he's a monster, past taverns where the laughter stops when he passes. And he returns to his house outside the walls, a house surrounded by silence, because silence is what society gives to the people it uses. That is why the executioner's life was pure hell, not because he killed, but because he was forced to carry the moral burden of an entire town. He did what everyone demanded, and then everyone punished him for it. And maybe the darkest truth is this: medieval executioners didn't just execute criminals. They executed society's fear. They were hired to prove that law had teeth. But in return, they were stripped of their humanity. They became the living reminder that civilization is only stable when someone is willing to do violence on its behalf. And no one wants to admit that. So they pretend the violence belongs to the executioner, not to them, not to the king, not to the church, not to the crowd, just him. One man, one axe, one cursed profession. And when you imagine a medieval executioner, don't picture a villain. Picture a man walking home in silence after the crowd is gone. A man who has done his duty, a man who has delivered justice. And a man who knows that the same people who demanded blood today would happily watch him die tomorrow. Because in the Middle Ages, justice didn't cleanse society. It stained whoever carried it, and the executioner carried it until it destroyed him.